How's it going, everyone? It's Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and in this video, we are going to be discussing the Suikoden 1 and 2 remaster. And I'm primarily going to focus a lot on Suikoden 2 because I really feel like it's a very important JRPG, and I'm happy that Konami has brought the series back. I'm glad that they announced a new Suikoden entry, even though it is going to be a mobile game. But I want to talk about how I believe it was a smart move for Konami to release 1 and 2 together, and how I think they should handle 3, 4, and 5 if they get to it. But before we begin the video, there are going to be heavy spoilers for Suikoden 1 and 2, so if you have not beaten these games, please do not progress past this. The footage in the background is going to switch from a lot of things happening in the end game for Suikoden 1. I'm going to show parts of the beginning for Suikoden 2, a major fight, and I'm also going to show parts of the end game. So you have been warned. To kick things off, let's talk about Suikoden. Overall, I think Konami did a really good job. And I'm really hoping that people play this game and keep in mind that they are playing a title from 1995. No, we were not able to move in 8 directions when this game first came out. It was restricted to just 4 directions. The additional freedom of movement feels like you are much faster in this game. There's actually a running animation, which was weird because back in its initial release in 1995, you could only see the main character run in loading screens. Every other time, it was like a fast walk when you had Stalin in your party and stuff like that. It always looked really awkward. And there are some cutscenes where they did not change the fact that he was just fast walking in and out, which I thought was pretty funny. Outside of these new animations, I think the one thing that they added that I think has generally been positive are the new character portraits, with the exception of Taiho. You can go on the Suikoden subreddit and you will see a lot of people questioning, what the hell did they do to this man? What is going on with this face? And to be fair, it does kind of fit the scene of him kind of being a creeper a little bit, because he is a bit of a womanizer, and that's seen through multiple cutscenes in his dialogue. There is a battle event in which you are facing off against Sonya Shulin, and there's a part where Taiho hits on her just before you're about to fight, and the way he looks is downright creepy. And I don't know why the portraits ended up that way, because for the most part, I thought Flick looked great. I thought Victor looked great. I do think Necklord was like really weird. I don't know why he looks that way. It's very awkward. I wasn't a fan of like the way the Celestial Sword was drawn. And by the way, why did we change the name of that? I'm not going to try to get into that too much, but for the most part, Suikoden remained the same. And here through the remaster, you can see this foundation that was set up by Konami that was going to be built upon as the series progressed. And Suikoden was kind of a bold gamble at the time, because most JRPGs were transitioning from the 2D space to the 3D space. And I really felt like you would have to do something wholly different from established franchises to really set yourself up to succeed. And I think they did a really good job here, because you have the 108 Stars of Destiny to recruit. You have base building. You have an isolated and personal conflict. Most JRPGs at the time really emphasized the world-ending cataclysmic event, the hero party cliche, where you are going out there and fighting against that evil, and that is it. But here in the Suikoden series, these conflicts are generally isolated to a specific region in this world. They do take place at different times, but most of these conflicts generally affect 1 or 2 major regions. And I always found that interesting, because instead of this one character against the world type deal, you had to build an army to take down an empire, and I found that to be very fascinating when I was younger. You were also seeing a unique approach as it pertained to the actual action in the game. You had army battles, you had turn-based combat, and then you also had the 1v1s. And the 1v1s, to me, were a massive highlight in the original Suikoden, because these 1v1s required you to actually pay attention to what was being said, to kind of go into this rock, paper, scissors mode. And then on top of that, these 1v1s were so important, especially early on, when about the time you get Pan back into your party after his betrayal, you have to build him up so that he can survive and beat Tio, your father, because if you don't, you will not get the best ending in this game. And that is something that blew my mind when I was a kid. I remember I beat the game blind, pulled up a Prima guide, and went, "You can save him?" I was unaware. So I remember immediately going back in, leveling Pan up to level 30, getting his weapon sharpened, I think, to like 11 or 12, giving him the best armor, and then constantly reloading that fight until I won. Because Teal McDowell does a ton of damage. He'll absolutely massacre you in that fight if you're not careful. But you can beat it. You can win, and it does come off as really cool, even though afterwards when you talk to Pan, it's like he doesn't acknowledge it at all. And that's one of the things that I really felt like was probably just a limitation at the time, was that while all of these things were happening, it didn't feel like the castle itself and the characters around it were acknowledging that all these events were going on. But for the most part, what Suikoden did was just kind of lay this foundation down, throw a lot of things at you, and a lot of them actually stuck. The worst part about the gameplay was really the inventory system. You had fast travel, you had all these things that really made sense, and then the remaster didn't try to remove those blemishes, which is something I greatly appreciate. Now, my biggest beef with Suikoden is that its villains just weren't compelling enough, primarily because they weren't a consistent presence. Wendy is, in my opinion, a really interesting character if you're making up canon in your head, because she's after the Soul Eater. She's known Ted and chased Ted for years and years. And beyond that, you're just like, when do I get this one-on-one fight with her? It never happens. Instead, you watch Barbossa, after your fight with him, just kind of yeet her off a building, which to me was very disappointing. I really wanted to see a 1v1 with Barbossa, and I think that would have added so much to this game, but he's only in 3 scenes, I think. The beginning of the game, when Futch is looking for the Moonlight Weed, and then the very end of the game. And I really feel like for this character to look as he did, to kind of be that big bad, just didn't have a presence at all. And that was really, to me, the most disappointing part of Suikoden, was that I felt like the story had such a good buildup until you got to the point where like the villains just were kind of largely absent. You had some really unique betrayals, but it was characters you really didn't interact with. They were present there. Yeah, of course, I hate Sanchez. He sucks. But for the most part, you don't really know much about them. You just had a lot of mystery surrounding these characters, and it's unfortunate that it just didn't amount to anything. It was really undercooked. And I was hoping that when a sequel eventually came out, if one did come out, that we were going to get this really compelling plot and in-your-face, front and center villains. Beyond that frustration, though, I really felt like Suikoden was a good foundation for the series. And even after playing the remaster, I felt like, yeah, I remember this game being pretty solid for its time, but I remember it being greatly overshadowed by 2. And after completing Suikoden II and getting the golden ending, and just kind of sitting back and evaluating my time with both games, yeah, 100% I'm right. Suikoden 2 is a leap. It is a leap visually. It is a leap narratively. It is a leap scale-wise. Everything in this game is greatly improved. Now, it doesn't mean that it's perfect, because I really feel like there are some blemishes with Suikoden 2 that I overlooked because I felt like the overall product was fantastic. But there are some things that I was frustrated about. Some of the recruitment requirements kind of suck. For example, let's talk about Simon. And I'm going to call him Simon. If he's pronounced Simone, I don't care. But he requires the Rose Brooch. And to my knowledge, there's really only 2 ways to get it. And if someone says the rope climbing game, I did not see that at all as a drop. It is really through the sculptures you can build from Jude, and at Banner Village as a rare item drop. So if you do not know, rare items in this game, they only appear after 30 minutes of roaming around in-game time. So if you go to an item shop and you talk to the shopkeeper and you're checking for that rare item selection screen, if it is not highlighted, you cannot select it. And if you went in before a 30-minute mark, it resets the timer completely. That is a dumb system. And the fact that this character is tied to that system is very frustrating because Simone and Vincent were my last two characters that I needed to recruit. And that was just, it was mind-numbingly painful to constantly go out into the world, kind of hang around for 30 minutes because I had every character. I had the Squirrel Squad. I had all the rare animals. I was just waiting for Simone so then I could recruit Vincent, and I needed that Rose Brooch. It's a system that I do not like. It's frustrating. With that being said, it doesn't take away my overall enjoyment of this game and why I hold it in such high regard, because it is really this massive step forward. The inventory system is so much better in this game, especially when you're trying to store items, retrieve them from the different warehouses, when you are equipping items from your bag. It felt like a modern day RPG system. For whatever reason, Suikoden 1 was just like this old, archaic, outdated system, and Suikoden 2 came in 2 years later and was just like this breath of fresh air. And I really love the fact that in this game, you're not just limited to one rune per person. Now, you have multiple rune slots. And this was a game changer because now you could really min-max with your characters. If you wanted to have a person who could heal and also do heavy damage, you could do that. You could then take your characters, give them the double beat rune, which makes you an absolute dominant force with physical characters. You could have the killer rune, which allowed you to do high crits. You had counters. All this stuff was going on. It just felt faster. You were just kind of going through battles quicker, and everything felt more cohesive. I really enjoyed the fact that they really upgraded the Unite system, which was taking certain characters like Flick and Victor and having them team up for attacks. You had Milkotov and Camus, you had Hicks and Tengar, all that stuff. All these different characters and combinations of parties that you could create to really help maximize your damage output. All of that was done so much better and handled so much better here in Suikoden 2. When it came to the base building, you got to see this massive castle get built out and this community all come together of all these different races and stuff. And one of the things I really enjoyed was the fact that they were reactive to the events that were taking place. They knew what was going down in South Window or Radat Town. They were well aware of how big of a danger the Highland Army was. All that stuff really adds to this experience. And I also love the fact that they added minigames, which was kind of weird. The first time I saw the Iron Chef minigame, I was confused because I was picking up all these different recipes and I was thinking, oh great, I can now make food and have this like weird old school medicine system kind of go out the window, because making food in this game actually buffs your characters and they can heal for more, and it's also cheaper. So you can just do that instead. But you'd go in randomly and you would see a cutscene where you were going into these Iron Chef events and you were taking on these crazy chefs, and every time you beat them, you were given their recipe. And it really helped you along the way. And I thought these were a lot of fun. The rope climbing minigame I mentioned, you have a whack-a-mole game. You could play dice, run investigations. All of it felt like it just added to the overall experience. It wasn't just like a random base just sitting there with characters standing around, just waiting to rip you off. And I'm looking at the blacksmiths because why were there 5 of them in the original Suikoden? I didn't understand it. Like, and why did it cost so much to upgrade weapons in my castle? Konami needs to answer that because that really upset me. Regardless, the base building was an upgrade. And even though I had frustrations with some of the requirements to recruit characters, recruiting the 108 Stars of Destiny in this game is far more enjoyable. And I really like the fact that because this game is set 2 years after the events of Suikoden, you get to see a number of characters from the first game return, which really adds to the world building. One of the things that I really enjoy about recruiting some of these characters is that you can go on these really long quests, like with Clive, or my favorite is with Hicks and Tengar. Seeing them again, I think they're 18 in the story, they might be a little younger, but it was so interesting finding them randomly in Lakeview and then off to the Kobold village where you have to do like this quest of manhood, where the chief of the Kobold village is like, we don't do this anymore, but then Tengar kind of convinces him to go through with it. So she fakes being ill, and then you go on this little journey where it's just a bunch of goofy random things you have to find. The best one being the green bell, where Hicks is essentially like a Labrador puppy. He's just kind of like, we have to find it. And then the kobolds of this village are really trying to help them out. And it's just really funny because your character is well aware about what's happening. They're like, I mean, Tengar isn't really sick. She spoke. I saw them talking to each other. She coughed, all that type of stuff. It's a very humorous, very fun moment. And it was just great seeing those characters again under different circumstances, because Suikoden 1 kind of lacked humor at times. There were some funny moments, but I really feel like Suikoden 2 is just better in regard to its writing, and it really kind of shows in a number of the different quests. I really liked all the different interactions between Flick and Victor. I really felt like Flick, for the most part in the first game, was a bit too rigid at times. Even Victor really didn't have that great of a personality. And then you get into 2 and it's like they're completely different characters. And it just felt great to kind of watch those two build their own mercenary fort together, and for Flick to actually put up with Victor, which was really shocking. Overall, Suikoden 2 just blows the first game out of the water. But I think that where it absolutely crushes it is the villains. And I'm going to primarily focus on Luca Blight. So if you have not gotten to the point where you beat Luca Blight and you were just happening to watch me spoil all this other stuff, and you don't want to spoil the Luca Blight fight, now's the time to go away, because this entire section is going to be about him. Luca Blight, to me, is one of the greatest JRPG villains of all time. And I have him in my top 5. And the reason why I have him there is because this character is completely irredeemable. Even with a tragic backstory, there is nothing redeemable about this character. From the way he carries himself, from the moment he is introduced, he is the villain. He is an evil monster, and his actions reflect that. And the way they build this character up, and the way they push you toward that final confrontation, is epic. And one of the things that I really feel like a number of different JRPGs fail at is that they have this villain where they try their hardest to really humanize this character. They try to make you empathetic toward them, so you're somewhat conflicted when you fight them, but it's clear that their behavior is evil. And this is done in the attempt to really add a layer to these villains. Like, maybe they're not all bad. That is not the case with Luca. I really look at him the way I look at Kefka from Final Fantasy VI, where basically they're a character who sees this chaos, doesn't shy away from it, embraces it, and is completely fine with taking advantage of these individuals who cannot defend themselves. Every single action that Luca takes throughout this game makes you hate him so much more, regardless of his backstory. And that, to me, was really well done by the Suikoden development team. So as you're progressing through the story, you know that eventually you are going to get into this fight. And Luca is going to be a handful. The moments you start to see him appear in these big army battles, you'll notice that his attack and defense are just disproportionately higher than every other character you go up against, maybe with the exception of Uber. But Luca Blight is in a category by himself. So you have this fight, and Shu tells you, hey, we're going to try to ambush Luca Blight. And it takes a lot. I'm not a big fan of the army battle system in Suikoden 2, if I'm being honest. I think that it's a little bit too low percentage, which can really slow things down. But this fight feels like you have to be on your toes, because characters can die in these army battles. So when you go up against Luca, you have to be strategic with what you use. You have to use magic. You have to use fire spears. It really feels like a Herculean effort to take him down just enough so that he teleports away, and then you can begin the second phase. And this second phase is set up by Joey, your former best friend, and Leon Silverberg. And it's really fascinating because they're like, look, man, we don't like this dude either. We think he's a threat to everyone, including his own people. So we're going to tell you that there is a night raid that he is going to lead, and this is the only time you can ambush him. And because Shu is a very pragmatic strategist, he says, this is it. But here's the thing. You would think that this is just going to be one big turn-based fight. You might fight some other enemies along the way. But Shu says, hey, we're going to have 3 squads. And when I was a kid playing this for the first time, I was taken aback because I said, what do you mean 3 squads? I know I have enough characters, but they're not properly leveled. They're not equipped for this. Now, while I'm excited because it's going to be a 3-pronged fight, that's really cool. I'm also very concerned because I don't think any of these characters are going to survive. Like, what are the consequences if someone fails? Suikoden can kill characters, and I didn't want to lose any of them, which would potentially ruin my chance of getting the 108 Stars of Destiny. But because I had gotten this far, I said, screw it, let's go on with the fight anyways. And I stumbled right through it until the end. And even though I emerged victorious when I was younger, and it was by the skin of my teeth, I learned 2 things about Luca Blight. The hype surrounding him was real, and there is no way that this character is human. 0 chance. Because when you're fighting Luca Blight, when that all kicks off, and you see him get knocked off his horse, takes a bunch of arrows, cuts the arrows off of him, and then just proceeds to fight 3 different squads, that shit was amazing. You're saying to yourself as he's cutting through your team with all of his different attacks that are cutting through squads and, cutting through columns, all of that was like mind-blowing. And then you have to 1v1 him at the end. Now, granted, he has no health left, and you really just can't mess up the last attack, but that entire sequence is epic. And I have never seen that before in any other game. This is a human character, and it took an entire army to take him down. I loved it. The entire sequence from start to finish. I was blown away as a kid, and as I was going through the Suikoden II remaster, I was blown away again. Because I had totally forgot how dangerous this character was, and it really put me on my toes and made me think that I was going to lose because the amount of damage he was doing was insane. He was straight up like killing characters in one hit. I was like, this is not good. It's not gonna work out. Even with all the different strategies I had used in years past, I was really nervous going into this fight, and I love that. And Luca Blight is one of those characters that really put fear into you. In JRPGs, these types of 3-tiered fights, they are reserved for characters that turn themselves into demons or gods, not a human. Right? Think about that. They are reserved for these characters like Sephiroth, who you fight as a human, he turns to the one-winged angel and has that other weird transformation, and you're just like, what is going on? Luca Blight says, nah, it is sword and nothing else. There's no transformations here. I'm not summoning a beast rune. None of that stuff. There's no dragon like Barbossa. It is just me. And that is epic. And the fact that it took 3 squads, a 1v1 in an army battle, to take this character down, I just can't explain it. And the balls by the development team. The balls by the development team to have you kill one of the primary villains of the story, essentially 2/3 into the game, and have the game continue on afterwards. I can't believe they did that. This was an ending fight. I was supposed to see the credits roll. Nope. I still gotta go and take on Necklord. I still have to go and take on Uber. I still have to go and take on Joey. It's insane. It should not have worked, but they did it anyway. And it surpassed my expectation because here's the thing. Even after beating Luca, the story doesn't get worse. There's still a personal conflict that has to be resolved. The Highland Army is still fighting. You still have to gather individuals to end the war. It's fantastic. It really blows my mind that 2/3 of the way in, you kill a villain, the game's supposed to end. You're expecting the credits to roll, but instead you're given an epilogue to play through, and there's no drop-off in quality. And to me, it's what separates Suikoden II from other JRPGs, because most games would not take that risk. You do not introduce a character like Luca Blight and just kill them off halfway or 2/3 of the way through because you've spent a lot of time building this character up. And so when you take them out and you have that moment of quiet, you realize that there is an entire plot surrounding the rune of beginning, the Bright Shield rune and the Dark Sword rune, that has to be resolved. And in my head, especially as I've gotten older, I wondered, like, how do they pull this off? Because it shouldn't have worked. I thought that when replaying this game that maybe I was relying too much on nostalgia, and that eventually when I got to this part after Luca Blight, that back third was probably going to suffer a bit, and it doesn't. The final third of Suikoden II is fantastic. You get this resolution to Necklord. You get to see the Matilda Knights finally get what's coming to them after they betrayed you. You get to see what happens to Highland when you finally do invade and take Renoville. You see all of these different characters wrap up their stories fairly neatly, and it culminates in this duel with Joey. And that duel is so well done, and the first time you play through it, you're probably thinking to yourself, you have to beat him. You do. You have to beat him. And this is probably something you will do on your first playthrough. But on subsequent playthroughs, when you have the 108 Stars of Destiny, when you realize that you can save Nanami, if you're fast enough. And that when you get to that duel with Joey, you just have to defend. And as you're progressing through this scene and you go back into another part of the duel, you just keep defending until Joey relents and says, I can't fight anymore. And then you get a cool cutscene. You get told by Shu that Nanami is alive, and then you get the golden ending. And these kids go off and they live their lives. And I think it's a really good ending, primarily because you have to remind yourself that it's really absurd that these adults, these individuals who have thrust themselves into conflict, are relying on teenagers to guide them through it. And it's very unfair. And I really love the fact that the game handles this perfectly. It never, ever sways away from reminding you, especially with Nanami and Ryu's conversations, that you are a teenager. And that it is completely unfair that you are in the position that you're in. So at the very least, I'm glad that there was a happy ending. The Suikoden II remaster really reinforces my belief that this game is a top 5 JRPG of all time. And I'm happy that I'm going on social media and I'm on Reddit and seeing people really talk about the game and talking about how much they enjoy it, and fans of the series who have gotten to replay it are talking about how much they love it. And I thought it was unique that Konami had put 1 and 2 together instead of just kind of working on one remaster at a time, but I understand why they did it. Because if I'm being honest, if they had just put 2 out by itself, I would probably only play 2. I would not have played the first game. But what I do like is that you can see the foundation in Suikoden 1, but then you can see the leap forward in Suikoden 2. And it is quite massive. It's a fantastic game. It really is. One of the things that I really like that I feel like people don't bring up enough is just how you can recruit the original hero. You can recruit Tyr McDowell from the first game while you're going through Banner Village, and you have like a little quest that you have to go through. I think it's really cool. But what I think is really awesome is that there are some characters that will react to him. And Kasumi, for example, if you are going to Greg Minster and you talk to President LePant, and he says, hey, you can take Val or you can take Kasumi. So if you take Kasumi and you go and complete that mission, you can tell that she is like blown away by seeing him again, that she is enamored by him, and that at the same point, she wants to talk about the Soul Eater. And this is where she kind of brings up this thing about the true runes that really doesn't get touched upon enough, I think, in the first 2 games, is that these runes are really a curse. And this is something that really gets expanded upon in Suikoden 3. It's the first entry in the franchise that really does a deep dive into the true runes, because you do get to see a number of them. You get to see the true elemental runes: wind, water, fire, lightning. And you also get to interact with other true rune users, which I thought was just fantastic for the time. So here's my plea to Konami. If the Suikoden 1 and 2 remasters sell well, and if you are really committed to this franchise and getting people to really play these games, you need to release 3, 4, and 5. I feel like Suikoden 3 is fantastic. In fact, I think it's the second best game in the series. And while 4 is a significant drop-off and is significantly shorter than almost every game outside of 1, I think that people need to play it because I believe its story is relevant, because it does give a different perspective on the true runes. Also, 5 is a great game and was a return to form, and unfortunately, it also ended up being where the franchise stopped. Now, that is going to change when Suikoden Starleap releases, but 3, 4, and 5 should not be ignored. And I think they should all be released at once. And look, if a remaster isn't going to happen, I think the next best step would be working with PlayStation and then getting 3, 4, and 5 on the Classics platform. I would be 100% for that. I really do think people need to play 3. 3 is just amazing. Multiple perspectives, a deep dive into the true runes, and you get some really, really surprising lore drops and some surprising twists. I was blown away by that game when it first came out. 4 was disappointing, but I do think that, if you're a completionist, you should play through the game. And 5 was great, and I mean that. George Prime is a main character in that game, and I love George Prime. You also get to see Killy in probably his best form. If you were underwhelmed by Killy in Suikoden II, which I think a lot of people were, because when you see him, he looks cool, he doesn't do a lot of damage. You get him in Suikoden 5, it's a completely different story. I'm very concerned as to why that was. Regardless, 5 was a welcome return to form for the franchise. And look, I understand that it took a long time for these remasters to come out. I remember staying up until 11 p.m. to watch these announcements because I thought that on the off chance that Suikoden was going to be continued, that it wasn't going to be a pachinko machine. When we got the remasters, I was over the moon, because that meant an entirely new group of JRPG players were finally going to experience this game that a lot of the old heads, a lot of the Suikoden community members have been gushing about forever. The last time you could really play this game, I think, was on like the PS3 and the PSP. That was 20 years ago almost. You know what I mean? So it's been a long time since people could get their hands on these two games, and they've aged fairly well. Suikoden not so much, but Suikoden 2, it's fantastic. But those are my thoughts on the games. Let me know what you think in the comments, because that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider sharing, and subscribing. I am Ken for Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.